Heaven Official's Blessing. Chapter 248. Audio source: wuxia-world-audiobook.com. Extra: The Crown Prince's Bizarre Memory Loss Adventures. Sanling is a good J. Both of Xie Lian's eyes widened suddenly. At his incredulous expression, Sanling said, "What's wrong?" How could Xie Lian even put it into words? The shame of having been conned, of having been fooled into turning in circles, the misery, mixing with his heated blood, rushed straight to his head. He slammed his palm onto the tabletop, biting out every word and sentence. So, it was you. It was impossible for the tabletop to have withstood his blow, and it broke on the spot. Fortunately, there was no one on the second floor of the tavern besides them, otherwise they would have been greatly frightened and horrified. Xie Lian did not have any weapons in his hands, but struck out with his fist. However, Sanling continued to sit on his seat as before, and only tilted his head slightly. That strike crushed into the wall behind him. Stone crumbled and fell. However, he did not move an inch, instead hugging his arms, and raising his gaze very slightly, said, "Dao Zhang, what is the meaning of this?" Xie Lian's face felt extremely hot, and he had no idea just how red his face currently was. The bones in his other hand cracked and popped, as he said with fury, "You, cease your pretense. What you did to me, you know full well." Sanling's gaze rose a little more. He said, "Very unfortunately, I am indeed unsure just what I have done to Dao Zhang to cause you to be thusly angry. Could you please enlighten me?" To think that this person would say such to him with a face full of innocence. What could he say in response? To speak of such things in broad daylight. Never before had Xie Lian encountered such a person, and he was so angry that he shook from his shoulders to his heart, his face growing redder and redder, his speech incoherent as he scolded. "Shut up! Someone like you. I am going to beat someone as shameless as you to death. Indecent. Despicable. You." Sanling sighed, and said, "Dao Zhang, I did not expect my wholehearted sincerity to receive such a response from you. Just how am I shameless, indecent, and despicable?" With difficulty, Xie Lian regained a modicum of calm, and said, "Don't think you can trick me further. The red thread on your hand is clear proof that you are that. Oh." But Sanling was not harried. He raised his hand, and said, "Are you talking about this? Is there something wrong with this red thread?" Looking at that red thread, Xie Lian felt as though he had been pierced. He said, "I've seen it. At that time, your hand had this red thread." Sanling said, "At what time?" In an instant, Xie Lian really wanted to beat him to death. Still asking despite knowing the answer, it was too vile. But for an inexplicable reason, regardless of how furious he was, he could not bring himself to lift a hand. Furthermore, it wasn't because he was under the control of someone that he was unable to move. But rather, it was his own body that was not allowing him to move. Just at this moment, a few people thought it upstairs, saying, "What are these two honored guests doing? Don't fight and smash things as you wish." Xie Lian turned his head and said, "It's dangerous here. First, you should." Who knew it? With that one look, he froze again, stupefied. To think that, on the hands of all these few people, a red string was tied. Unthinkingly, Xie Lian said, "What's with the red thread on your hands?" A person said, "Red thread? Isn't a red thread just a red thread? What's so strange about it? It's no big deal." "There's nothing about it." Xie Lian became confused. Could it be that in this place the tying of red thread on one's hand was a very normal fashion trend? He turned his head back. As though having read his thoughts, Sanling said, "Dao Zhang's guessed pretty well. The tying of a red thread on one's finger is a custom here. If you don't believe, please look at the crowds below." Xie Lian cast his gaze at the lower floor of the tavern. As expected, amidst the ever-flowing crowd of people, were quite a number of hands which had a red thread tied on them, and some even had quite a few tied on. He said, "What sort of custom is this?" Sanling gave a small smile, and said, "About this, it is also related to this Chang. What? It's because on his hand and the hand of his beloved is tied such a red thread. And so, many people followed suit, to pray for their fated marriage partner, or to express that they are in love." Xie Lian listened in a daze, and said, "That is to say, this Chang must be quite an amazing person, to have so many people ardently follow suit." Sanling said, "Whether he is amazing or not would depend on who you are comparing him with." "Oh yes, Dao Zhang, there seems to be something which has fallen onto the floor. Can I pick it up to examine it?" At that, Xie Lian finally began to react. He had thus far been maintaining an attacking stance, but it actually was yet another foolish mistake on his part, and his anger drained away completely. He hurriedly withdrew his hand, saying, Sorry, Sanlang, I'm really truly very sorry. It was me who was on edge, and misunderstood you again." Sanling continued to remain at ease, and bent at his waist to pick up something, saying, "No harm done. Dao Zhang, is this something you dropped?" From the mess on the floor, he had picked out a piece of gold leaf. It had likely fallen from Xie Lian's sleeve just now when he had struck out. Xie Lian was just about to speak, when he saw Sanlang lift that gold leaf before his eye, and squinting, said, This gold leaf looks rather familiar." Having spoken in a manner that was neither too hurried or too slow, he retrieved an item from around his waist. It was another gold leaf. 2 pieces of gold leaves, exactly identical. Without giving it any thought, Xie Lian said, "So this actually belongs to you?" Sanling said, "Oh, I had indeed dropped something, which was why I had doubled back to look." Hearing this, Xie Lian was deeply afraid that he would misunderstand, and hurriedly said, "Sanling, let me explain." Sanling said, "No need to be anxious. I would naturally listen to Dao Zhang's explanation." Xie Lian breathed out in relief, and said, "It's like this. This gold leaf I had picked up just now on the road. My original thought was to wait for the owner to return so that I may give it back to him, but after I had waited for more than an hour, no one came by to look for it. At the same time, I was indeed." Having spoken up to hear, he felt a bit embarrassed. He lowered his head, and said in a small voice, "And so, I acted on my own initiative, and borrowed a little first, to buy a little something to eat. It was that manto. I had intended to pay back the money with interest at a later date, but no matter how I put it, it still returns to the point that I had taken something that wasn't mine without asking. I'm sorry." But Sanlang was beaming as he said, "There's no need for Dao Zhang to feel like that. Isn't it after all a common human response? Besides, I always had the intention of inviting you to join me for a meal, and that manto, in the end, wasn't I the one who ate it? Such a small thing, don't let it trouble you. Don't you find it very astonishing? What a coincidence, for something I had lost, to be picked up by no other person than Dao Zhang. This must really be a fated meeting." 2. Having received his forgiveness and understanding, Xie Lian's heart eased. He said, "That said, Sanlang, you two should be careful. Dropping something so shiny on the road, and yet you did not notice next time. Don't be so careless." At this moment, the crowd of waiters who had been cowering at the side, said, "These 2 honored guests, have you calmed down? If you've calmed down, then let's calculate the cost of this smashed table." Xie Lian, if things had been as they were, payment would not have been an issue regardless of the sum. But now, he could barely even afford to buy a manto. However, Sanlang said, "It's all right, put it on my tab." It was clearly him who had struck out at Sanlang just now, but Sanlang was volunteering to help him pay for the things he had smashed. Xie Lian was so moved by his warmth and generosity that he was speechless, and after swallowing, said, There was also something odd about the crowd of waiters. Even though their shop had been smashed up, they still came over cheerily to assist them with changing to an even more elegant table. As the two people sat down once again, Xie Lian could not help but feel both guilty and grateful that no amount of words could sufficiently express how he felt. With a concerned tone, Hua Cheng spoke again. Dao Zhang, listening to your speech just now, it seemed as though something is troubling you. What's wrong? Dao Zhang, just what has been done to you, and by whom? Something like this? How could Xie Lian voice it aloud? His expression, which had only just calmed down, blushed with shyness once again. Softly, he said, "It's nothing, there's nothing wrong." But San Lang said, "If you don't mind, why don't you tell me about it?" Perhaps San Lang, too, can assist a little. Even though he meant well, but Xie Lian felt as though he was being chased and cornered, without a way out. Unable to sit still, he said helplessly, "It's really nothing. San Lang, can you please stop asking anymore?" It was too difficult to speak the truth. Seeing how things were, San Lang no longer forced it, and said, "All right, where did our previous conversation leave off? You wanted to meet Hua Cheng." Xie Lian gathered his attention, and said clearly, Does San Lang know a way?" San Lang said, "Of course I know, but, for these few days, it won't be easy to meet Hua Cheng." "Why?" Using chopsticks, San Lang arranged the vegetables plate into a large smiling face. He said, "It is said that, recently, his heart's beloved is feeling slightly unwell, and so he needs to accompany them. Besides this, he has no time for anything else." Xie Lian thought, indeed, this Hua Cheng was truly someone of a temperate personality, someone full of affection, and he grew to regard him even more favorably. He said, "I see. Then, how long must we wait before we can meet him?" 5 days as an upper estimate, 3 days as a lower estimate. I suggest, Dao Zhang, that there's no need to be anxious. Until then, why not be at ease and take a break? Just as Xie Lian thought to himself that he did not have a place to stay, he heard San Lang add, "If Dao Zhang does not have a place to stay, why not stay at my place for a bit? After all, my house is large, and not many people live there." Xie Lian could no longer hold back, and said lightly, "San Lang, you really are very good." It was the first time that he had used such straightforward speech to praise someone, and he felt a bit embarrassed, but other than that, he simply could not find a better way to express how he felt. San Lang seemed to enjoy it greatly, and said, beaming, "Why else would Dao Zhang and I got along so well from our first meeting? Oh yes, I've one more question, which I forgot to ask. What is Dao Zhang's age?" Xie Lian replied, 17. San Lang said, "Ah, 17. That's younger than me." Indeed, from his looks, he appeared to be around 20 years old. Seeing as things were, San Lang casually remarked, "If so, then Dao Zhang should call me Ji." Xie Lian was still of the royal family, Your Highness the Crown Prince, compared against whom no one else was more noble. By right, he should not be addressing the people around him as his fellow brothers, as barely anyone would be worthy of such a title. However, this San Lang truly gave Xie Lian a very good feeling, and since he never addressed those around him as a brother, it was a huge novelty for him. And so, he smiled and said, "So it's San Lang Ge." Perhaps he was mistaken, but after he said, "Ge," San Lang's smile before him turned slightly strange. It was simply too difficult to describe. The light in San Lang's left eye seemed to flare up all of a sudden, so hot that it made Xie Lian feel simply as though his skin was heating up. He blinked, and said, "What's wrong?" That terrifying burst of heat disappeared in an instant. Immediately, San Lang reverted back to as he was, and smiled as he said, "It's nothing. I was just too happy, that's all. There's no one younger than me in my family, and so I've never heard anyone call me that before." Xie Lian said, "If San Lang doesn't mind, then how should I address you?" The light in San Lang's eye flashed as he laughed. However, in his speech, he still declined. "Oh, of course I definitely would not mind. It depends on whether Dao Zhang minds." Xie Lian said, "I don't mind. Of course I don't mind." Sanling Ge, shall we return to your home now? Sanling placed his chopsticks down, and said, then, come with me now. Sanling's residence was an extremely spacious, beautiful and elegant mansion. Upon entering it, Xie Lian could only feel that when compared with some of the compounds within the Xianle Imperial Palace, it did not pale in comparison. This reinforced his impression that this Sanling was not a commoner. At night, lying alone in bed, Xie Lian tossed and turned. He kept feeling as though something was missing beside him, and no matter how he tossed and turned, he was unable to find any peace. Furthermore, with that hidden discomfort in his body, lying on his back meant pressing on his hips in a manner that was uncomfortable. But lying on his front made him feel as though something was pressing on his back. In his dazed confusion, he had a number of messy dreams. He wanted to move, but someone was holding him down firmly in place, and that voice was once again speaking in a low tone by his ear, sometimes a man's, sometimes a youth's. Sometimes it called him, Gurgur, Gurgur, sometimes it called him, Your Highness, telling him, don't be afraid, Your Highness. Tender to the utmost, wicked to the utmost, but also treasuring him to the utmost. He jolted awake. His clothes were soaked through with sweat. As Xie Lian gasped, he clenched his fists tightly, and viciously pounded on the bed, angrily, but weakly. He raked his fingers through his slightly damp hair, and thought, this sort of thing, when will I be able to forget? Once I catch ahold of this shameless bastard, I definitely will. At this moment, he discovered that at some unknown point in time, someone had placed a set of clothes by his pillow. Even though these clothes were also white, but their style was one which he liked. Feeling as though he had been given a reprieve, and hurried to the back of the house to take a quick bath. After removing his clothes, and immersing himself in the water, he suddenly discovered that hanging on his neck was a fine silver chain. On the chain hung a ring that was crystal clear. Who knew how long he had been wearing it in any case? For him to have completely not felt it, was what was strange. Do I have such a pendant? This ring was simply too pretty, and as he looked at it, he almost fell into a trance. However, he did not lose his wariness. Suddenly, he detected a flash of silver to his side, and he immediately shouted, Who? A strike to the water, and water splashed into the air, as though a steel ball had been thrown, ricocheting noisily off the walls. And what he had knocked out of the water was not a person, but a saber? Xie Lian caught hold of that hard and unyielding saber, feeling extremely doubtful. Suddenly, a silver slit on the saber's handle parted, as though the opening of an eye, with the eyeball rolling around wildly. Xie Lian was even more shocked. What was this strange thing? That curved blade of the saber was long, and as though it had life, dove enthusiastically into his embrace. Caught unawares, Xie Lian was unable to stop it, and was chilled to the point that he could not help but cry out, Wah! And his whole body gave a shiver. But more or less because he did not feel any killing intent. Xie Lian did not find this curved saber to be dangerous. And besides strenuously trying to push it away, he did not intend to use more violent actions against it, such as sending it into the clouds with a slap, and other such like. At this moment, a red shadow darted over, and with a single move snatched that saber, saying in an ominous tone, So here you are. Focusing one's gaze, Sanling was already standing by the bathing pool, and pinched within his hands was the saber. Even though he still wore a faint smile on his face, the hint of green veins had appeared on his temples, and without any courtesy, he gave the saber a slap, saying, Didn't I say that you're not allowed to come here now? Xie Lian said, Sanling, is this saber your magical weapon? Sanling turned towards him, and the green veins in his temples disappeared in an instant, and he once again resumed an air of calm. He said, It's just an ignorant thing. Ge has let you see something embarrassing. But Xie Lian only felt greater awe and respect. His eyes lit up, and he caught hold of the side of his red clothes, saying, No, 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 San Lang Ge, you're far too amazing to be able to cultivate such a sentient magical weapon. After having been smacked by San Lang, the saber had scrunched up its eye as though it had been wronged. Listening to Xie Lian's praise, its eye once again began to roll around smugly, and sneakily tried to inch its way towards him. Very callously, San Lang gave it another slap. This time around, it gave up, and fell to the ground with a dong and rolled and rolled and rolled around, like a child who had been hit by an adult and was rolling on the ground and crying. It was almost as though Xie Lian's ears could hear the sound of its wailing cries. The sight made his heart ache slightly, and he hurriedly stood up and said, "Wait, San Lang. Forget it, don't hit it anymore." I guess he was just being mischievous in the moment, and wanted to come over and to greet me. There's no need to reprimand it like this. But only after emerging from the water did Xie Lian remember that his body, which had been in the water, was bare, and his face inexplicably turned red again. Awkwardly, he sank back into the water. However, San Lang had earlier turned around in a manner that was very natural, and left. Xie Lian hurriedly climbed out of the water and changed into his new clothes. He could feel, from where the clothing clung to his skin, that the material was extremely fine. Finally, his skin would not be chafed uncomfortably, and in his heart he felt even more grateful for this. Emerging from the room, and arriving at the elegant hall for receiving guests, San Lang was already seated there, waiting. Goodness only knew how he had disciplined that saber. Now, it hung honestly by San Lang's waist, when it was not moving about this way and that as it pleased. It unexpectedly had a cold and lethal air, and it was completely impossible for one to imagine its previous manner of rolling around and throwing a tantrum. Seeing that Xie Lian had arrived, San Lang smiled and said, "You're up. Did you sleep well last night?" Xie Lian answered honestly. "For some unknown reason, during the first half of the night, I kept having dreams. But I slept well in the second half of the night." San Lang said, "Perhaps you were too tired." The two of them spoke whatever sentences came to them, and with a few rounds of conversation and discussion, the day more or less passed by. It seemed likely that, until that watching person was free to meet, they would continue to spend their time together like this. However, at night, as Xie Lian lay by himself on the bed, he once again had those dreams which made one feel heated up and unable to be at ease. In his dreams, he was tossed and turned about, teased until he could hardly bear it. When he woke up with a jolt, his body was once again soaked in sweat. Feeling angry and helpless, he could only get up and go out, with thoughts of walking a few rounds to calm down. However, he suddenly heard from afar sounds coming from another room. It was from San Lang's master room. The soundproofing of the room was excellent, and the sounds were very soft, but Xie Lian's 5 senses were extremely sensitive and he had caught it. Soundlessly, he crept outside the room. Through the crack between the doors, he peered into the room. He saw San Lang seated on a seat in the room, holding a brush 3 in his hand, as though writing something. His expression was cold, completely different from whenever he faced Xie Lian. To his side, there was even someone in black clothing and a mask with the face of a ghost bowing at the waist, giving his report in a low voice. For some inexplicable reason, the person in the ghost face mask had a very muted presence, as though one might accidentally not notice him at all. Xie Lian was just about to listen more carefully, but that person had finished giving their report, and he could only faintly hear fragments of phrases and sentences. That creature had been making trouble for a long time. Think he went to settle it before receiving any prayers, and had an accident. This is the direction that was just investigated, etc. He was slowly combing his hair when he heard San Lang say, "I need to accompany him now, and can't excuse myself. Deliver that creature here before tomorrow night." The person in the ghost face mask said in a low voice. "Yes. Do you want it to be left with a breath?" San Lang put away the brush, and looked at what he had written. He did not seem to be too satisfied with it, and crumpled it up into a ball, tossing it aside. Only then did he say, slowly and leisurely, "Leave a few breaths, let him spit out that thing, then slowly crush its ugly head." 4. As he spoke these words, his expression and tone were the sort that made one shiver. However, unexpectedly, Xie Lian did not feel any revulsion or wariness despite this. The person in the ghost mask gave a wordless noise of assent, and made to leave. Immediately, Xie Lian darted away and hid himself. Xie Lian was all the more unable to sleep after he returned to his room. He paced a few rounds back and forth, thinking, just what sort of person exactly is San Lang? What creature was he referring to? Based on what he had heard, it sounded like something important had been swallowed up by a creature that had been creating trouble and causing disasters for a long time, and San Lang was very angry. But because he had to accompany him for now, he was unable to excuse himself to smash that creature's head. His thoughts having reached this point, Xie Lian felt very embarrassed. The San Lang truly treated him with utmost sincerity. Suddenly, an idea flashed across his mind. Why should he just sit here idling like this? Besides, he wouldn't be able to meet Hua Cheng for now, and he had also been continuously thinking about doing something for San Lang, who was a good GE. Why not help him capture this creature? It was a decision made on the spur of the moment. Having decided as such, Xie Lian immediately left a letter behind, writing, San Lang GE, do not worry, Lian has left and will return, etc. Then, with a leap, he soundless left this elegant mansion. MXTX Author's Notes. This extra about the curious wandering of Xie Lian's memory has one more chapter. I had originally wanted to finish writing it today, but the word count was more than I had imagined, so it will continue tomorrow. Tazy calling him GE. Wawa is overjoyed. Yi Ming was not deliberately trying to peep at the bath. Yi Ming is a good child. It's just that he often took baths with Xie Lian previously, and so he had gone over today with great anticipation. Who knew that he would get beaten up? Translator's notes. Wulong. Pinyin. Wulong. I translated this as foolish mistake, but I'm not sure if it captures the full nuance of this term. It's like a mistake one makes, which is also to one's detriment. One suggested English equivalent I found when I was searching for better words was own goal, which I think captures it quite well. Pinyin. Yu Yuan Qian Li Lai Shang Wei. Lit. If two people are fated, they will be able to meet even across 1,000 miles. Specifically, a zihao. Pinyin. Zihao is calligraphy brush. Its bristles are made with the fur of a particular type of rabbit, and is darker in color. That refers to the bristles being a darkish purple, and supposedly more sturdy than a brush with bristles made from goat fur. San Lang actually refers to the creature's head as its go-to. Literally, dog's head, but I don't. He's being literal here about the type of head that the creature has. Dog here is used more like an insult, ugly, worthless, etc. End chapter.